しい。これなんだかわかるか？エンサイクロペディアエステティカ。
Hey, what the fuck?
It's a whore!
Making sense is for fucking squares. Often what's most important about a great piece of art is that the creator respects the audience enough to provide them with imagery, sounds, and experiences that don't feel the need to constantly explain themselves. Once you immerse yourself in a solid vibe, the spiritual rhythms and flow of a good piece can create more than enough of an environment for the audience to properly experience and enjoy it. Nothing is more unsatisfying than experiencing a fantastical scenario that feels like it's actively trying to prevent the audience from getting lost in it.
What the hell are you talking about?
Will you tell me what the hell is going on?
No.
I'm a huge advocate for this kind of David Lynch-esque approach to enjoying media, where the mark of a great piece of entertainment often prioritizes appealing to impressions and feelings, overriding the urge to explain every little thing in an objective fashion. In simple terms, who gives a shit? Who gives a shit that Totoro flying around doesn't make sense? Who gives a shit that people running around in blue suits isn't accurate to how computers work? This kind of nonsense isn't a flaw, it's a representation of the strengths of human expression and imagination. There's some great games that carry this strong impressionistic energy with them. Killer 7...
I don't follow.
Silent Hill... I don't know... Castle Crashers... But in terms of quote-unquote weird games, Mother 2 is one where you'd be surprised that I'd never played it before.
Okay,
It's embedded itself within the consciousness of gaming culture so deep that it's very easy to hear about the game's most notable elements by either experiencing it by osmosis or experiencing one of the many games that were deeply inspired by it. I'm aware that I'm not going to be treading new ground when talking about a lot of this game's elements. It's been picked apart by a very passionate fan base for 30 years now, so I want this video to focus a bit more on my personal takeaways from the experience. These are my impressions of a very overdue playthrough of Earthbound.
Outer space.
House.
Once you get into this intro segment where you climb the hill to find the meteor, what immediately becomes apparent is how lovingly crafted the soundscape for this game is. I'll be bringing it up more than once because it's fucking awesome, but the number of samples and fun sound motifs introduced within even the first half hour of the game rivals the total amount of samples from some other SNES games of the time.
Nothing about this is good.
The thing about Pokey, or Corky as he would later be known as, is that he exists as this vile foil to Ness. Unlike our mute protagonist, Pokey is one to be braggadocious over the most minor of victories, and loudly wallow in despair should a spiteful crow even share the same screen as him. Pokey takes advantage of the wordless Ness by assuming this pseudo-leadership role whenever the two are together. It's not like the latter can give any verbal rejection, I guess. Whilst Ness's heroics are shown through the player's presumably good actions, Pokey fills the holes in his moral compass with excuses, lies, and taunts.
There's a magic bee that lays out the basics of the journey ahead, and it establishes the key points and conflicts of the game. There's this world-ending cosmic force that destroys the world in the future, so the bee travels back in time to relay a prophecy involving you and your future party of friends. And after a scripted fight involving this little Starman, the bee explains that there's this world-destroying cosmic entity called Gygus, or Geeg, Goo Goo Gaga the World Ender, is beginning to influence the minds of animals and people, turning them wild or hostile. It's a good way for a kid's game to not only have an incredibly nonsensical roster of enemies, but also to explain that instead of killing people and animals, you're just knocking a bit of sense into them. Except robots and aliens. Those get the old Samurai Jack treatment.
Okay.
I'm really sorry that my kids troubled you so much. Both of you are really going to get it now.
The new norm ain't the same as the old norm.
There's this great bit where the bee gives this dying speech after Pokey's mom slaps the shit out of it. After this, the game really starts proper. One of the main things I like about the towns in this game are their focus on making them seem like real places in terms of layout and content. Some buildings are open for you to explore, and some folks tell you off if you knock on their door. Places like bakeries and fast food places have certain items that heal very little HP, but do a good job of filling out a menu in a convincing manner. The item descriptions don't always offer a full picture of what an item's use is, so you kinda have to use it to figure out what it does. It kinda reminds me of those restaurants and cafes you can enter in Persona 2, where you have to try different items in order to figure out what stat buffs they give you.
Let's use a spell! Yes, Papa.
I really liked this system of calling your dad to save because it provides this subtle picture of Ness's family situation. It's obvious that his parents are divorced and that they both love him very much, and the fact that not a lot of attention is brought to it is a really good way of normalizing this kind of family dynamic. I'm sure there were kids back then that really connected with Ness because of stuff like this, and the game overall is really great at injecting little pieces of reality without it feeling false or hokey. Using the phones to save and get money never feels like too much of a hassle because it's very easy to rake in cash from your dad after defeating a big chunk of enemies. He always gives you the appropriate amount of cash for encounters, kinda like a delayed version of receiving money at the end of a battle. And I rarely found this system to be annoying because there's always a phone and an ATM next to vendors and important services.
At Giant Step there's a monster guarding the spot from the outside world. No one knows when the monster may Giant Step its territory. I wonder if he's stronger than my wife.
Sub.
I love how basic all the NPC sprites are, and their little idle animation where it just looks like they're doing a little tap dance with their feet is the cutest thing.
Tap shoes, tap shoes.
By the time you explore most of the town, the low-level enemies you fought near the beginning will start to run away from you, and if you catch one like this, it ends the battle immediately and gives you the appropriate amount of XP. It's a really good way to remove drawn-out fights with weak enemies like certain other RPGs at the time, and only gets more useful as the game goes on.
The overworld sprite. Racist.
I love this little musical leitmotif whenever you enter a cave or a spooky area. It helps reinforce the feeling that there's this weird kind of UFO presence that's influencing things around you. The enemy encounters here also do a really good job of giving you a taste of the different kinds of enemy encounters you'll be facing in the game. The slugs teach you about large enemy groups, the mice teach you about critical hits, and the first sanctuary boss teaches you about buffs and debuffs.
Stop! No.
The cops catch you sneaking out of the cave, and you have to visit the station in order to get the okay to move on to the next town. Oh no, looks like Gygas's energy made them turn off their body cams. There's something really satisfying about beating a squad of cops.
With a baseball bat.
No, I'm having so much fun!
I'm about to end this whole career.
I'm not exaggerating when I say that these mushrooms are the worst enemies in the game. They don't do much damage, but they have this move where they sprinkle spores into the air, which has a high chance of mushroomizing one of your party members. In combat, it works a bit like Confusion does in other JRPGs, where your commands can affect the wrong target, but the fun doesn't stop there. In the field, your controls are completely fucked up. It's not just a simple, oh, your controls are reversed, like the fucking Contessa fight from Sly 2. Your controls are totally fucked up. There was a couple situations where I was mushroomized and was trying to get into the hospital to see the doctor that cures uncommon status effects, but I kept entering and exiting the hospital because I wasn't sure which direction moved me forward and back. I just imagined the hospital receptionist watching this little cordyceps kid just banging into the glass door every 5 seconds. Thankfully, there's not a lot of these enemies in the game, and the ones that are around are usually a stone's throw from a healer. But the rare occasion where they're in the middle of a dungeon elicits such a primal level of fear that I can't even describe it. There's a reason they're the only thing in the game that has evil in their name.
There's always something so special about visiting Twoson for the first time. You're finally out of the Onett early game, and are greeted with a pleasant change of overworld music. The gently plucked guitars and understated horn of Boy Meets Girl gives a mature aura to your journey, as if you're really trying to make something out of all of this.
The towns in this game often involve this kind of ping-pong between points of interest to reach the next major area. Twoson is more spread out than the first town in terms of objectives, with your primary one focusing on finding Paula, your second party member, whom I've called Ano.
The parts where I see myself.
The Happy cult kidnapped her, and her folks are mildly concerned about it.
Ano is like a mother to me. You might not be able to comprehend my emotions. I might have a baby face, but I possess the mind of an adult. I beg your pardon.
Where's your mom?
Since the early game is just Ness going out on his own, one of the main issues that crops up early on in the game is the inventory management. You're going to be carrying around a lot of equipment and key items, which leaves very little space for combat and recovery items. You can call people at phones that can store items like an item box for you, but it's done in a way where you can only drop off 3 items per call, which kind of just wastes time. I always assumed the bit with the pencil eraser item took place much further into the game, but it ended up being this interesting little section involving this inventor called Apple Kid that gives you a mobile phone that, once you encounter the big metal pencil in Peaceful Valley, calls you when you're on your way back to town in order to give you the pencil eraser. You know, to erase the pencil.
I'm gonna make this pencil disappear.
Peaceful Valley is the first dungeon that I found to be pretty challenging. It It's one of the longer dungeons in the early game, and it ends up tossing some pretty interesting combat scenarios at you. It takes around halfway through the game before you start encountering enemies that deal serious poison damage, so for these earlier segments there are these little UFO enemies which shoot rays that give you a cold. It's like a less severe version of poison where you sneeze and take a bit of damage every turn. Suicide enemies are also introduced here in the form of these trees, and it's super important to kill these enemies last because in Earthbound, damage doesn't get removed from your health immediately. It ticks down until either the amount of time it takes to remove the health is passed, or until the battle ends. So killing a suicide enemy last barely takes anything off of your health bar, unless your reflexes are slow. Battles in this game can get surprisingly hectic once it starts to mix the damage ticking mechanic with enemies that can technically kill you in one hit. Once a party member begins to take mortal damage, it becomes a race against time to heal them before the damage catches up to them. I really like RPG battle systems like this that find ways to inject excitement into the gameplay without resorting to gutting the turn-based combat. Stuff like this, the ATB system from older Final Fantasy games, or the press turn system from SMT, really disprove the corporate mentality that turn-based combat is outdated. If you're willing to put in the work to make combat interesting, it's going to be interesting regardless of what form it takes. Much like the pencil eraser bit, I assume the Happy Happy Cult segment took place much later in the game. But I suppose part of the fun of finally getting into a piece of media that's become so well known over the years is just seeing the various pieces you've been exposed to fall into place. Pokey returns here and is working for this Colonel Sanders-ass cult leader, Mr. Carpainter. It's unclear whether or not Pokey himself kidnapped Paula, but I wouldn't put it past him. One of the things I start to notice during this whole Happy Happy Village segment is the different ways that the SNES's hardware gets pushed in this game. It's easy to tell that the sound chip has its work cut out for it, but with things like this tent full of cultists, you can feel the game start to slow down a bit with everything on the screen. Its focus on presenting the game world with these simple sprites and animations allows the hardware to focus on different means to show off the console's capabilities. One of my personal favorite mechanics in this game are the teddy bears. Paula comes with one once you defeat Mr. Carpainter and free her from the cultists, and it works as a decoy that draws enemy aggression until it gets destroyed. It's especially useful when you get new party members because they all start out with dangerously low stats, and need to level up a bit before you feel comfortable using them in combat. The bears act as a kind of cushion that allows you to stay in harder areas while also getting much needed XP from enemies. Aside from Ness, Paula's probably my favorite party member in the game. I expected her to be something of a healer along the lines of Aerith from FF7, but she works more as an offensive mage. I really like the PK effects in this game. The sound effects in general have a lot of personality to them, but these little Atari effects and visuals that emerge whenever you use your psychic powers are so goddamn cool. It complements the simplistic presentation of the game without sacrificing satisfying audio-visual feedback. Speaking of, the critical hit effect might be my new favorite crit sound. It sounds like a fucking car crash. The second Sanctuary boss is in this cave off to the side, and I love how unnecessarily freaky his design is. It's a really funny contrast since a lot of the enemies in this dungeon have this really pleasant look to them. Returning back to Twoson, it's kind of endearing how cool everyone's parents or guardians are with their kids going on this journey to save the world. I suppose Earthbound is a fantasy RPG in the sense that you're living out kind of a children's fantasy of going off on this big adventure that your parents are totally okay with. Before moving on to the next town, there's a couple things you have to do in Twoson first. First is to meet back up with Everdread, a dude you fought earlier after he fell off of a fucking roof.
When I jumped off the roof, I twisted my ankle.
Twist!
And he just randomly gives you $10,000. But don't get too excited. It's a key item you have to use at the
Chaos Theater
in order to get the Runaway 5 out of debt. These fucking dudes are probably my favorite side characters in the entire game. One of them just looks like Scatman John, and they do these funny little spins during their performances. There's a pack of spooky ghosts that haunt the tunnel to the third town, but with the help of the band's van, you end up pushing right through them with the power of music. The game always does a good job of keeping things fresh in terms of progression and events. Sure, every section ends with you having to go through a dungeon in order to find another sanctuary to record into your soundstone, but the sequence of events that get you there are always different. Word around town is there's this terrible monster called Belch that's taken over the area, with the help of zombies and ghosts, hence the ghosts in the tunnels. You end up getting lured into a hotel by this suggestive-looking
ass,
wherein you're captured by a room full of Halloween creatures. While imprisoned, Paula decides to try and contact your third party member via telepathy, and we're transported into a section where you play as Jeff, whom I've called Peter. It's these kinds of asides that I knew the least about going into this game. I assumed the game was going to have a bit more of a rigid structure of Ness having to enter an area and do something to find the sanctuary dungeon, all the while finding the occasional party member, but I didn't realize that half of the party members technically end up finding you. Jeff's introductory area has some great moments that I never knew about. A monkey that helps you by blowing bubblegum, a friendly Loch Ness monster, and this simplistic little dungeon made by a guy called Brick Road. Jeff meets up with his dad, Dr. Andonuts, near Stonehenge, and he lets him have his special Skyrunner flying machine in order to save Ness and Paula, which he then crashes into the cemetery. In a gameplay sense, the whole gimmick with Jeff is that he's a tech-savvy, kinda like Apple Kid. And there's a chance that he'll fix broken items in his inventory every time you rest at a hotel. The problem with it is that the chances of him fixing things are really hard to pin down, and there's a risk that you'll be spending the majority of the game with a bunch of broken items in Jeff's inventory. It's also a bit of a gamble on whether or not the repaired item is going to be good or not. Some of the items end up being very situational or pieces of equipment that end up getting replaced soon after, but some are useful items that don't even get consumed after a use in battle, like bazookas with splash damage or sprays that can give the party more defense. It's one of the more flawed systems in the game, but there's enough rewarding stuff to gain from it that it doesn't feel like a total shit show. If there were a bit more reliability to the chances of Jeff repairing things at a rest stop, more useful item outcomes overall, and maybe a couple more inventory spaces for him to carry junk, it'd be more of a satisfying system. But with a game this experimental, you can't expect every experiment to be a success. After using another one of Apple Kid's inventions to distract the zombies, you go through this path that leads you to a special area full of these little creatures that speak in this wild font. These are the Mr. Saturns. Lots of really useful services here too. Free hotel and doctor, shops with great recovery items, and tons of weird dialogue.
So, you have $380. We trade signature
drug things.
This next bit, however, is kind of weird in an unsatisfying way. One of the Saturns tells you about this waterfall password where you need to wait a few minutes before they let you in, and you have to wait 3 minutes in real time without touching your controller until the door opens for you. At the end of this weird slime alien factory bit, you find Belch, who lets out these huge burps. And it's ironic how the cleanest sounding audio sample in the entire game is this big fucking belch. He also has one of my favorite designs in the game, which they use quite a bit in the advertising. A lot of the enemies have these really simplistic designs to them, with the backgrounds behind them doing most of the legwork in terms of visual appeal, but every once in a while you get a real banger of an enemy sprite. There's this great bit here where you drink coffee and have this introspective moment where this big text crawl talks about what brought you to this point and how important it is to keep a sense of humor on the hard road ahead. It really drives the point home here because the breaks are situated in places that feature a high concentration of goofy shit. It reminds me of someone telling a kid how loved and important they are at a time where they won't fully come to understand the weight of the words until later. The game does a really great job of capturing that kind of childlike pace and energy to its story beats, and it feels like eToy wanted to provide the player with a chance to look back on how far they've come. It's kind of like the video game equivalent of those markings you'd put on a door frame to mark how much a kid's grown. Before moving on to the next town, there's this section where you have to help out this excavation team in the desert. The Runaway Five need more money in order to pay off a debt in the next town, so you have to go through this desert cave and defeat 5 moles that all claim they're the 3rd strongest mole of the bunch, and their little background has this big number 3 as you fight them. It initially made me wish there were more backgrounds that took advantage of words or symbols, but there's so many amazing little animations and patterns that appear during a lot of the battles that this desire kind of fades away after a while.
The big city!
Fourside really leans into the isometric style of presentation, which really helps with its scale. It's a clever way to use perspective as it makes the city feel larger than the other towns, in a way that doesn't really require the explorable area to be any bigger than the previous areas. My favorite touches are these skyscrapers that obscure the party as soon as you move behind them. Within one of these towers you can meet back up with Pokey, but as usual he acts like a huge tool, literally and figuratively. He's partnered up with the mob boss in this area, Monotoli, and kinda just power trips until he tells his guards to take you out of the room. You only meet back up with Pokey a handful of times in the game, and it's always meant to show that he's an expert at sampling the shoe leather buffet. Because of your time in the desert cave dungeon, one of the excavators stops your party on the way to town to hand over a diamond they managed to uncover. The diamond's a key item in the same way that the $10,000 was in Twoson, where you need to use it in the jazz club in town in order to clear the Runaway Five's debt. Eventually the department store in town opens up, and Paula ends up getting kidnapped by this wacky alien inside. Earlier on in the game, you get a Franklin badge during the Happy Happy Village segment, which allows you to reflect the lightning attacks that Mr. Carpainter uses, and it makes this satisfying little noise whenever you fight enemies that can shoot lightning.
See you later, Squidnator.
You end up finding Everdread in an alleyway, and he goes on about how the evil statue that Carpainter was around is now in the possession of Monotoli. He tells you about this weird thing behind the counter of a nearby cafe and then bumbles off to God knows where. In this case, a weird thing is a bit of an understatement. Much like the cult section, I was always kind of unsure where the Moonside segment was in the game and how long it would take to get through it. Turns out it's surprisingly short for someone going in thinking it was going to take at least a few hours.
I find I'm always surprised by Moonside's duration whenever I get to it, especially given its iconography.
It's one of the only segments in the game where the frequency of the enemy encounters started to get on my nerves a bit. There's a couple sections in the game where the enemy spawns could easily be compared to random battle systems from other games at the time, but here it becomes pretty annoying since you're trying to figure out the teleport destinations.
Okay, and goodbye.
For some reason, I usually end up accidentally stumbling on the correct path and reaching the Manny Manny statue, which perhaps I'm a bit too prepared for.
For me, the Manny Manny statue ended up taking a bit more time. It's got this addiction with stunning the party in a way where I can't recover them properly, but after a little trial and error, the statue breaks and the illusion ends. Moonside ended up giving me a bit of trouble, but a lot of it's based on luck, so there are other segments in Fourside that could prove to be more challenging.
More often than not, I find the shopping mall right before Moonside to be what I usually get stuck on, with the stupid musicas and all. I suppose Moonside being short isn't too much of a problem. Oftentimes in games, there's a stage or level where the aesthetics suddenly turn delirious. However, can you really say that when a lot of places in the game are just straight up wacky?
After leaving the cafe, a monkey and a messenger tell you about this area in the desert that you need to go back to, where it's this funny little puzzle box that involves you having to give monkeys different pieces of food until you finally get to this spiritual leader type guy that bestows upon you a special yogurt dispenser that has the ability to make trout flavored yogurt. This is all well and good, but the best thing to come out of this is that the monkey in the room ends up teaching you how to do the teleport spell, which is such a relief after the past few hours. The Fourside section of the game is definitely the most ping-pongy in terms of going back and forth between areas outside of town, so putting something like this here at this point in the game feels fittingly enough like finding water in the desert. Once you get back to town, this woman takes your yogurt dispenser because she's desperate to make trout-flavored yogurt, which I swear is not a euphemism for anything.
Shut it, Wendy.
And the next dungeon takes place inside the mob boss's tower. The enemies in here are a little annoying because they do this unskippable security countdown before every fight starts, but ironically, it did make me notice how much I enjoyed the text boxes in the game. Every once in a while you talk to someone and their text can sometimes start and stop with different timings in order to emulate the rhythm of conversation, and it's this subtle little touch that I love in these kinds of JRPGs. There's this wacky little robot that serves as the boss for this dungeon, and it keeps healing itself by eating bologna sandwiches. I initially thought it was a kind of damage wall where I needed to level up more in order to do enough damage to combat the healing, but suddenly, it's the Runaway 5. Yeah! They break into your battle screen and trash the robot.
Son of a bitch.
Turns out that Monotoli was being possessed by Gygas's evil power through the statue we broke, and tells us that we can take his helicopter to the town of Summers.
Helicopter, helicopter!
This little motherfucker's back, and his stupid head juts out of the helicopter in a really funny way.
Bitch.
A bunch of little roundabout trips happen next. A little drive from the 5, a little fly in the sky, and you're back to the Stonehenge area to fight the 4th Sanctuary boss. It's the most evil, diabolical one yet, a mushroom.
No! Not
the Mushroom King!
Luckily, it feels like the game kind of understands how much of a fucking death sentence the mushrooms are, and the Sanctuary itself is nice enough to get rid of the evil mushroom curse. Off we go, yippee!
If you come closer, I'll play the trumpet. I don't know how to play yet.
Summers is my favorite town in the game, primarily because I really like the vibes. Shocker, I know. It's got the most unique layout in which the entire town is a straight line along the shore of the beach, like a waterfront, and the whole thing kinda reminds me of the Costa del Sol from FF7. There's a guy you meet near the edge of town that's willing to sail you over to the next area, but he's worried because his wife doesn't make magic cakes anymore.
Which I swear is not a euphemism for anything.
Shut it, Wendy.
And she spends all of her time at this club in town.
You guys can't envision the final collapse of capitalism?
I can definitely see why you'd want to go back to this club.
Go back to the club.
After she leaves the club, she resumes her work and gives you a magic cake to eat. Oh, God, I don't... What's going on?
Drug things.
This is Pooh's introductory segment, whom I've called
Baby.
This little section introduces his hometown and leads up to one of the best scripted sequences in the game, where Pooh enters a deep state of meditation. It's one of the darker gags in the game, but it's fun to see how each of the party members are treated based on their particular skills. Ness, being the blank slate that he is for the player, is presented with psychic powers in a very casual, nonchalant way after leveling up a few times. Paula's parents celebrate her powers, but are aware that she might get too much attention because of them. Jeff doesn't have psychic powers, but his entire section takes place in and around the school dorm, and introduces his proficiency with tools and devices. Pooh is the most unique when it comes to his upbringing because it feels like he's being prepared to deal with the whole Gygus situation. Out of all the cast, it feels the most like he's undergoing some sort of spiritual assignment, as opposed to being thrust into an adventure. In a way, he serves as a good indicator of the stakes. We're told of the prophecy of the 4 children that'll defeat Gygus throughout the game, but to have the last party member teleport in out of nowhere and be like, yeah, I'm the 4th party member, let's get going, rounds out the party in a very matter-of-fact way. There's a couple errands to run before moving on to the next big area. First is to the Summers Museum, where you're given a hint for a puzzle later on, and the second is back in Fourside, where you have to give this creepy museum guy an autograph of his favorite singer. There's this great bit where security has to remove him from the stage for trying to recreate his favorite scene from Perfect Blue. After that embarrassing display, he lets you into the back of the museum, and the sewer section is one of the other annoying dungeon crawls. There are these ghost enemies that can possess you with these little spinning ghosts that can occasionally screw with you during battle, and while it's not as annoying as the mushrooms, it's still a status effect that's hard to cure. At least it's got a funny looking sanctuary boss at the end of it.
I'm the giant rat.
Die.
The whole boat ride with the Kraken fight is another one of those events that I'd heard about before, but I wasn't sure how important of an event it was going to be. Turns out it's a pretty brief encounter if you've been leveling up properly, and he goes down pretty quickly after a few turns.
Where's the
hard boss fight?
There was supposed to be a
hard boss fight.
Okay, no more.
Shin Megami Tensei.
Scaraba is probably the briefest town section in the game, consisting of this one section of market stalls and buildings, leading right into the desert and the pyramid. In the earlier desert section, your party sweats in the desert, and if it gets left for too long, you end up getting heat stroke. I never tried it, but I'm pretty sure if you drink water, it can help prevent this, but when your party has status healing spells, it really isn't much of an issue. My interactions with certain items were a little on and off throughout the course of the game, so I apologize to Earthbound veterans if I'm just like dead wrong in regards to certain item trivia.
Go to the
Weenie Hut Juniors.
The two main things you have to consider when judging a dungeon in this game is 1, how long is the dungeon, and 2, how bad are the status effects going to be. At this point you become aware of the items that are able to revive party members, like secret herbs, horns of life, and life noodles, so the main thing to keep track of is how much a specific enemy halfway through the dungeon is going to make you want to rip your hair out. And the worst thing in this pyramid are these snakes that can poison you, which is one of the easier things to cure. Pooh has to undergo some training, so he leaves the party for a while, and you end up finding this huge dungeon statue that houses Brick Road. This is one of the more meta sections of the game, where Brick Road leaves signs all over the place explaining different aspects of dungeon design. It's this weird little deconstruction of the way the game designs its dungeons, and while it could be mistaken as an out-of-place tutorial, it feels more like Brick Road's thoughts being put onto random signs because he's lonely. It's another example of Itoy just injecting random sparks of humanity into his characters. There's a sense that Brick Road just wants to show off this mediocre dungeon he created with this awful music that he's really proud of, and because it's easy to get through, it mostly just serves to develop a side character. Once you meet him, he explains that Jeff's dad hired him to be the dungeon man, and he's literally just fused into this giant statue dungeon that you've been going through. For a brief section, he becomes your 4th party member, and he just lumbers behind you in this little desert section while this wild track called Megaton Walk plays in the background.
My sound chip is about to burst!
If I knew he was going to be in your party for this one strip of land, I would have used him for grinding because he's super overpowered against the enemies here, but he ends up getting stuck between some palm trees. You can't get to the next section without a submarine, but Brick Road tells you that he's got one in his vehicle collection, so you go back in, and there's this great bit with a little save point gag.
I set up a telephone line in the dungeon. I wonder if that's controversial.
In Earthbound, there's never any save points in the middle of dungeons, so Brick Road pointing out that it's controversial to put one here got me kinda good. This section initially scared the hell out of me. The first screen or two is pretty normal, but you get into this section that's pitch black, and for a few moments I was filled with an SMT-esque feeling of despair that I was going to have to do the entire dungeon in pitch black darkness while treading through deep HP draining water. Luckily, all I needed to do was go on this little hill near the beginning and talk to a monkey that tells you to use the stone you found in the pyramid to light up the area. The hint in Summer's Museum says the same thing, but I forgot. After that, I found it to be one of the better dungeons in the game. The enemies here are a decent challenge without being super annoying, and the gimmick of wading through this deep swamp while this oppressive music plays is a cool change of pace. This was one of the tracks I'd never heard before, and it ended up being one of my favorite dungeon themes in the game. It's a pleasant surprise given the fact that Earthbound has one of the most recognizable soundtracks of all time, especially when it comes to the battle themes. There's a real slick nature to a lot of the battle tracks in the game. They assert themselves in a way that blends with the psychedelic backgrounds, the weird enemy designs, the clicky-clacky UI noises, and the wild PK effects to form this iconic, laid-back vibe that you could just soak in for hours. You eventually find this cave village of little creatures that are really socially awkward, and it's obvious that it's an area that we have to revisit with a key item. And as soon as you leave, Apple Kid calls just in time for you to hear him get kidnapped, and for Orange Kid to butt in and tell you that the reason he doesn't talk much is that he wanted to borrow a book from Apple Kid called Overcoming Shyness. I was pleasantly surprised with how the game guides you to the next important event. Whenever you get to that point where you think to yourself, I just got stuck, what do I do? 9 times out of 10 you end up getting a call from Apple Kid explaining that he invented something that's exactly the solution to the roadblock. The game's hint system is really solid too. with this designated hint man in every town that tells you what to do next for a small fee. It's honestly a breath of fresh air. The only other JRPGs I'd played start to finish on the SNES before playing this were the first two SMT games, which are pretty lackluster in regard to giving proper hints or quest directions. So the knowledge that this game was going to have my back when it comes to progression filled me with a nice warm feeling. I never had to look up a walkthrough once while playing. The only time I asked for outside help was when I was checking with Eat Your Greens about something relating to the sanctuary in Twoson, and he let me know that you can come back to certain areas after you get the teleport spell in order to finish off all the sanctuary dungeons. It made me realize that a lot of the sanctuary points are less of a one to the other and more of a checklist kind of deal. There's a couple here and there where you need to go through them when they're presented to you in order to progress through a certain section of the story, but a lot of them are kind of reminiscent of something like the Lord Souls from the first Dark Souls game, with the main difference between the two being that Earthbound's second half isn't fucking terrible. I've seen better levels in Sonic 06 than some of the shit they put in the second half of Dark Souls. This sort of guidedness that Earthbound presents is one of the elements that feels the most like it's catered to young audiences. I heard the OG physical version of the game even came with a strategy guide, so it really feels like it encourages young players to push through until the end in a way that doesn't feel patronizing or cheaply designed. The only points in the game where I really started to feel pressure in terms of difficulty was with some of the dungeons and the enemy encounters. In this case, the struggle is represented by the Stonehenge dungeon. The Stonehenge base is the realest dungeon in the game in terms of combat challenge. After getting the eraser from
Apple Kids
Mouse Friend, you're thrust into this huge dungeon full of aliens and Starmen. The aliens have the power to diamond-dize your party members, which is this game's equivalent to the insta-kill move. Luckily it gets removed with revival items, but if you didn't bring enough, you're pretty fucked here. Thank goodness for save states on this perfectly legal, cheap, and easy to access physical copy I have lying around. I love the Starman designs. It's this super simple looking alien spaceman looking thing a la The Day the Earth Stood Still, with the main difference being that they pose like fucking chads. For a while I assumed they were going to have a wider presence in the game because the design's all over the advertising, but the way the aliens become more and more present in the enemy roster the farther you get in makes the Starmen seem much more important in the context of the game's plot. There's this stupid deluxe Starman at the end of the dungeon here, and it's here where Jeff really starts to pull his weight as a party member.
To me, I always had a fondness for Jeff, mostly because I viewed him as the game's easy button. If a particular dungeon or boss was giving me trouble, I would just spam his bottle rockets and call it a day. Not exactly the most reliable strat, but high risk, high reward.
As funny as it sounds, the biggest revelation I had while playing Earthbound is realizing how enjoyable of a game it is. Before playing, I always heard that Earthbound was one of those games that really relies on its aesthetic strengths in order to carry your interest through the game, but the mechanics here are mostly really solid. Battles have an engaging rhythm to them, exploration is rewarding, and the difficulty progresses along with the story in a really satisfying way.
Apple. You've saved me!
After a little pit stop in Onett to pick up the Shyness book, you can finally get the creatures by the swamp to loosen up and help you into the next dungeon. But first you end up drinking a cup of tea and another message crawl starts. Again, it's one of those things that I feel would be even more important to hear from the perspective of a kid playing it. The fights in this game can get pretty tough at times, but to have the game sit you down for a couple of minutes and congratulate you on your achievements so far would mean a lot to somebody who's new to playing RPGs. Also, Arch-fiend of the Universe is a really cool title for Gygas to have.
That comes later.
This dungeon near the Tenda village is one of the weaker dungeons in the game. I do like these swarms of fobbies that rush you because they give really good XP without much of a fight, but you also have to deal with these annoying electric enemies and what I can only describe as suicide minstrel balls. The Sanctuary Guardian here has another one of my favorite designs, but my party's not fucking around now. We've taken down so many of the fobbies on the way there that we make quick work of the little fella. But this pushover of a Sanctuary boss leads to the best Sanctuary discovery in the game, where you find this wall that displays Ness's thoughts. It's the only one in the game that you linger on for more than a few moments, so it ends up sticking with you. You fall into this weird prehistoric pocket world where you show up as these tiny little sprites, and I assumed that they were introducing a kind of mini overworld where you needed to go to several locations in order to access the 8th Sanctuary spot. But in reality, aside from a couple little settlement rest stops, it's just supposed to be a trail that leads to the dungeon. There's a magic rock in this settlement that tells you every Sanctuary location in the game, in case you've missed one, which ended up being super helpful because I'd forgotten one in Pooh's hometown of Dalam.
That comes later.
I've got big balls!
Die.
Gerber Life is accepting applications for their affordable grow-up plan.
I was surprised by how easy the last Sanctuary dungeon was. It looks like this big, intimidating lava cavern, but none of the enemies do any weird status effects to you, so aside from just dealing with a lot of enemies, you end up reaching the boss pretty easily. Some good Mode 7 backgrounds in here though. I was ready for a big fight at the end of this dungeon, but a volley of Jeff's multi-bottle rockets made the boss turn into a Diamond Dog! Diamond Dog! And aside from some added defense and occasional reflect shields, they didn't really have much up their sleeve. There really isn't any reason to grind in this game. During the first half of the game, simply going through and backtracking from the dungeons gives you enough XP to feel ready for each new section of the game, and the second half throws some crazier enemies your way to compensate for your growing list of psychic attacks and teleports. Aside from the ping-ponging you have to do to reach some of the objectives, there's no reason at all to go back to an area to grind.
I had the feeling that he was being watched by himself as a baby.
We take a trip to Dalam for the last Sanctuary spot, and you have to fight through this pretty easy dungeon full of Dairy Queen lips, thunderclouds, and flute worms. The music here sounds like something out of LSD, and because of how late I came to this dungeon, I end up steamrolling the boss in a couple of turns. It's pretty boring, honestly. The second half of the game feels more like a dungeon rush compared to the first half. You end up spending a decent amount of time in the first 4 towns, but the second half focuses on giving the player more straightforward dungeons and towns to skim past on their way to the remaining Sanctuary sounds. Places like Dalam and Scaraba don't require the player to do much of anything in them to progress the quest, and serve more as vehicles to funnel the player on the path to the Sanctuary dungeons. Whenever backtracking is done in the second half, it usually involves going back to an area from the first half of the game, because that's where all the well-established characters and areas are. I don't really mind the second half focusing more on dungeons than the first half, because it really helps reinforce the fact that Gygas is desperate to stop you. That being said, having another well-established town section in the second half would have rounded the game out a bit more and make it feel less like it's racing to the finish line.
Magicant is the realm of Ness's, or your, subconscious. How fitting that the final test to prove you're worthy to face Gygus be to challenge your own self. Although I wouldn't really say 13-year-old Eat Your Green's mind was filled with organic chemistry models and Baby King dice from Cuphead. It was probably polluted with King Hurricanian and Skullgirl's art.
Your Majesty!
Oh, I bet I could save Rukia from the Soul Society. Anyway.
Cringe.
Before this playthrough, I thought Magicant would be somewhere in the game's midsection as a kind of wacky dungeon to go through before returning to the established game world. That's only half true. While it is a wacky dungeon separate from the rest of the game, it's meant to be more of a summation of all that's come before. One of the cooler things about it is that it's not just a summation of the things you've experienced controlling Ness as a player, but rather the events of Ness's life as a whole, as you see flashbacks to yourself as a baby, hinted at with each new sanctuary location. I really like this touch here where the environment changes its color palette every time you talk to someone important. Some characters are just random folks you've met on your journey, and some go a bit deeper, like having a conversation with your younger self, or being told the significance of the area by Pooh's spiritual mentor. My favorite one is the Fishman, whom the player's never seen before, and he just says, "I still feel pain where you wounded me." The midsection of Magicant is the most trouble I had fighting enemies in the game. Not because the enemies were super hard or did any nasty status attacks, but because I went into the area with a bat that had an insanely low hit rate. Most of the battles here involved me just hitting the auto battler against these that kept spawning enemies until by chance I whacked them all.
I really hate this Sea of Eden. It's filled with these krakens and the return of the Manny Manny statue. Ugh. Still beats Sputter 1's Magicant, that's for sure.
In cotton candy land.
As intimidating as the Kraken was, or was supposed to be in the midsection of the game, the fact that they throw them at you here as regular encounters is one of my favorite means of displaying character progression in RPGs. Manny Manny gave me quite a bit of trouble with it mimicking your moves, but one thing he couldn't mimic was the bag of Dragonite I'd been saving in my pocket. The game then showers you with tons of extra stats and boosts, to the point where magic point conservation goes straight out the window. You have hundreds of points to just carpet bomb the enemies and psychic damage from now on. Dr. Andonuts is now in Saturn Valley, and he needs a special piece of meteor rock to make his face machine work without making the party do a Justin Trudeau impression. We all know where there's a meteor. Making Onett the last stretch before the final dungeon is a great little bookend. It's a short little hike to get to the meteor, so the game counters this by populating the area with the deadliest enemies in the game. You name it, they can do it. Diamondization, powerful multi-hit attacks, and even stealing. Get your fucking hands off my revival horns. Alright, where are we off to next? Alright, I'll drop the act. We all know what the fuck happens next. My favorite thing about these last couple of hours is how conceptually dense and serious they are. Throughout the game, progression usually involved cooking up some sort of cockamamie scheme, but here it's presented with a bit more seriousness. Dr. Andonuts explains that Gygus is planning to attack the world from the past, and the only way to stop it is to travel back in time and stop it before the attack happens. The catch is that the machine he invented can't transport living things, so the only way to do it is for Andonuts to transfer the party's consciousness into robots and send them into the final area instead. There's this really great moment where the doctor has to explain to these kids that there's a chance that their consciousness won't be able to return to their body after the mission is finished, and he asks you a few times if you're sure you're ready for it. And the dialogue here feels so natural. There's even a moment where the doctor composes himself before giving you the news. The cool thing about Gygus as a villain throughout the game is that you really only feel his presence in a second or third-hand way. He possesses statues that influence people, he influences the minds of the weak and vulnerable into attacking the party, and you only ever see the beings that work for him. The fact that you have to do this kind of elaborate scientific ritual in order to even approach Gygas's lair is such a great little reinforcement of how alien and intimidating this thing's powers are. The final dungeon isn't too bad though. The aliens aren't as nasty as the ones in the Onett section, so there's not much resistance on your way to the final boss. I do like this touch where if you access the save telephone in the phase distorter, your dad is weirded out by your voice being different. I'm not a huge music nut or anything, but I am still impressed that the entire song here is made out of a 1-second sample from a Beach Boys song.
Deirdre.
It's a poetic moment traveling up this hallway of alien birthing organs, only to find that little shit that knocked on your door the night the meteor fell. It's this perfect little joining of the first hints of evil with the ultimate incarnation of it.
Our nasty neighbor is always seen playing second fiddle to some other dastard, be it Mr. Carpainter, Mara Montoli, or Gygas. It isn't until Earthbound sequel, Mother Free, where we finally see the result of what Pokey's leadership would bring. A disgusting, imperialistic, and capitalist emperor that preys on the lonely and excluded. While this may seem to be an extreme jump from what was just your spoiled neighbor, well, I don't know, come on, he's literally serving the embodiment of evil.
I really like Pokey's design here in the final battle. It's like he has to be in this secure little spider robot, not to feel safe fighting you, but to feel safe while standing next to the fucking Antichrist. It's one of the only times in the game where someone talks to you during a battle, and what really sells the horror here is that when he turns off the machine that holds back Gygas's power, he expresses that he's scared too. Underneath all this petty bootlicking and high-horsing is a foolish kid that's standing in front of the purest source of evil in the universe. With games that take a lot from Earthbound like Undertale or Lisa, the darkness within their game worlds is reinforced and established throughout the game. Earthbound, however, is like if you stuck a big piece of cotton candy in between two very thin slices of cosmic horror. Aside from the intro screen, the game doesn't really show Gygas's powers in a way that feels distressing. That changes here.
The Gygas fight is a really great example of gaming as an experience. You could probably spoil yourself and watch the fight ahead of time on YouTube, but to actually play through the affair is an entirely different story. It's cheap to mock games like the Metal Gear Solid franchise for being movies or whatever, but when you actually sit down to play them, it's an entirely different ordeal. The same can be said for the Gygas fight. Sure, you can say after phase 1 it's just a playable cutscene, but when the controller is in your hands and there's the stake of game over looming over you, the tensions do rise. And that's nothing to say of the visual and auditory sensation the encounter puts you through, which really pushes the SNES to its absolute limit.
It's such a great way to use the Mode 7 backgrounds. Throughout the whole game you've been conditioned to see the background as nothing but psychedelic flavor to whatever you're fighting, but now the enemy is the background. It shifts and warps while these haunting drones and sparks sound out in the darkness. You're alone with this thing. But are you really? Once Paula starts to use her prey ability, all the people you've come to meet throughout the game start to literally send thoughts and prayers to the party, which does massive amounts of damage to Gygas. Jokes aside, it's not really supposed to be a Christian thing going on, but rather the expression of all the positive energy you've shared with others throughout your journey. What I learned to love about Earthbound is that it doesn't focus on building up the opposing darkness, it focuses on building up the light. It focuses on the love that people have for each other and your party members. It focuses on the power that connection and community has in overcoming evil and corruption. It shows you all the kinds of relationships and personalities that helped you on your way. In this way, the final battle is all about the power of love that's been accumulating in the foreground, going up against the hate and darkness that's been brewing in the background. Once you start using Paula's prayers, the fight's mostly over. You may have to heal your party every once in a while and dish out the occasional attack, but much like Eat Your Greens was saying, the rest is pretty scripted. After Pokey teleports away to another place in time, the images of Gygus become more and more unstable, until finally trailing off into the same red static that the game opens with. In a way, it kind of feels like the punchline to a joke. It's like the game going, oh yeah, we're doing a scary alien thing. After this, your party slowly begins to regain consciousness, and the game ends with you walking Paula back to her hometown, and you walking back home. No enemy encounters, no changing music tracks, just a little walk through the first couple towns in the game. Before I played through the game, I didn't really know what would happen after the final battle, but this simple little act is all that really needs to be done. The final battle does such a good job of reinforcing the themes of the game that returning to your friends and family really is the best way to end it.
There's something so candid about how Itoi portrays familial relationships in Earthbound and Mother in general. Obviously, he would delve deeper into the devastation of a broken family in Mother 3, but with Earthbound, themes may appear almost satirically standard, as if riffing straight off of Charlie Brown. But even then, there's a real enduring quality of it. If I were to be ever so pretentious, welcome to the party, pal! I'd liken Earthbound as video games' American Gothic, where it can be both interpreted as a mockery of such things, or a kitsch embrace of it. I think of the latter when it comes to Jeff and his father, Dr. Andonuts. The two seem rather distant at their introduction, but gradually warm up to one another in a very natural and pleasant way. Honestly, a very satisfying and heartwarming dynamic.
From the outside, it may seem like Earthbound is a weird game with wacky visuals and funky characters, but like many great works that seem weird on a surface level, looking deeper reveals an urge to offer experiences and feelings to the player that can't be replicated by works that insist on making sense on a surface level. Logic is important for sure, but understanding the less concrete logic of dreams, expression, and human connection is something that good fiction really excels at.
While well-renowned and quite popular today, it's easy to forget that Earthbound was a Dark Horse gaming release in 1994. This is the year of Doom 2, Super Metroid, Donkey Kong Country, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Hotel Mario,
Spaghetti!
FE3, shout out to my viewers, XCOM UFO Defense, the original System Shock, and Final Fantasy VI, among others. While the more introspective players were probably attracted to the quote-unquote more mature settings of some of these games, this deviation contributed to Earthbound's legacy. Its candid and ordinary setting and humorous writing sets it apart from its contemporaries. What was seen as its weakness has grown into its defining and most appealing features.
While certain games were beginning to incorporate a more surface level of mature content around the time, what makes Earthbound special is its commitment to emotional and interpersonal maturity. I'd argue that when it comes to writing and how the game expresses itself, Earthbound was one of the most mature gaming experiences you could experience at the time. I gotta admit I teared up a bit during this final section. It was such a joy to finally experience this game for the first time, and the amount of sincerity and heart that was put into the character writing, art, and storytelling really touched me in a way that few games do. When a game is all about defending humankind against a cosmic evil, it's satisfying to see it radiating with such endearing humanity. Hi everyone, thanks for sticking to the end of the video. It ended up taking a little longer than I thought it would, so hopefully it was worth the wait. With this video in particular, I wanted it to focus on my own thoughts on something like this, since it was something I'd never played before. It's a bit of a basic premise for a video, but I wanted to avoid a whole lot of overlap between other content creators, so hopefully that isn't the case with this video. Earthbound is easily the most popular piece of media that I've discussed on the show so far, so hopefully you were able to find my opinions on it entertaining. I wanted to thank Greens for his thoughts on Earthbound and the Mother series as a whole. As somebody who was going through the game for the first time, it was really nice to be able to have that contrast between somebody who's really new to the franchise and somebody who has a lot more experience with it. I also want to offer a big thank you to the folks who've been supporting me during my live streams. The channel itself is pretty small, and I only do live streams once in a while, but I really want to thank folks like 10 Elements and Alolan Skitty for providing a lot of really nice commentary for me to bounce off of during a lot of my live streams. I'd like to wish everyone a very happy Pride Month. Without support from the queer community, I wouldn't be nearly as happy as a person or as a content creator. It's been so brutal for so many people out there, and I just wanted to let everybody know that the reason so many people exist and feel happiness in this world, including myself, is because of the queer community. There's so much genuine love and support in this community, and I'm very lucky to be a part of it. Playing through the game and experiencing the kind of dialogue that was in it got me to thinking of if there were any other examples of video games out there that really nailed sort of natural sounding dialogue. If there are any examples of this that come to mind, I'd be really interested in seeing what y'all have to say about it in the comments. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you again for watching the video. It might take a little longer than my first batch of episodes, but rest assured I've got a lot more episodes planned in the future. I'll see you all later.